The other window and Labubu Peppa's room had always had one window. Through it, she could see their cozy yard with swings and a bright flower bed. But one morning, Peppa woke up feeling an unusual chill. On the opposite wall appeared a second window, old, with a cracked dark frame and murky glass covered with strange streaks. Beyond the window stretched not their yard, but a grim forest. Tall, grey trees without leaves reached toward a pale sky. Fog crept between the trunks, forming eerie shapes. And there, deep in the forest, something was moving. A dark figure slowly moved between the trees. "This can't be real," Peppa whispered, stepping back from the window. She looked through her usual window. George was playing in the yard with his dinosaur. Everything was normal. But when she turned back to the second window, the figure had come closer. "Mummy!" Peppa screamed. "What happened, dear?" asked Mummy Pig, hurrying into the room. "There's a window, a second window, and a forest, and someone's walking there." Mummy looked where Peppa was pointing, but saw only a pink wall with children's drawings. "That's just a wall, dear. You had a very vivid dream. Would you like some warm milk?" "No, Mummy, I'm not sleeping. Look carefully. Everything's fine, darling. Sometimes our imagination plays tricks on us." Mummy kissed Peppa and left. But the window remained. All day, Peppa tried to forget about it, played with George, drew pictures, but by evening, the window had moved lower, almost to her eye level. The fog in the forest became thicker, and the figure approached so close that she could distinguish its long, thin limbs. At night, Peppa woke up to quiet, rhythmic tapping on glass. The window glowed with strange, pale light. Behind the glass, right at the window, stood a figure. Now Peppa could see it clearly. It was a creature similar to herself, but distorted, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Pale, almost transparent face, two big dark eyes, a thin, unnaturally wide smile. "Peppa, you can see me," said the figure with a voice that sounded like distant echo. "Who are you?" Peppa whispered, trembling with fear. "I am Labubu. I have always been here, in this forest, waiting for you. You opened the window between our worlds, Peppa. Now I can come to you. I didn't open any window. Go away. But you looked through the window. You saw me. And now I'm here. Soon I won't just be behind the glass, Peppa. Soon I'll be next to you." Labubu laughed with quiet, ringing laughter. Peppa screamed and ran to the door. Mummy Pig burst into the room, turning on the light. When bright light flooded the room, the second window was gone. "Peppa, what happened? She was there. Labubu, she was talking to me. You had a nightmare, dear. No one is here." But Peppa knew it wasn't a dream. The next morning, the window appeared again, but on a different wall. Peppa began leaving notes on the windowsill. "Who are you? What do you want?" But in the morning, the notes disappeared, and words appeared scratched on the glass from inside. "I want to be real, like you. Soon I will come out." One night, something terrible happened. The window opened for real. Cold air from Labubu's forest rushed into the room, bringing the smell of old leaves and something dead. A long, pale hand slowly extended from the window. "Peppa, I'm almost here, almost with you," Labubu whispered. "No, please, no," Peppa screamed. "Mummy! Daddy! Help!" Labubu quickly disappeared into the window. Parents came running. She tried to come in. "Labubu tried to come into my room," Peppa cried. "We need to see a doctor," Mummy said to Daddy. But the window continued to appear every night. Each time it opened a little wider. Labubu became more insistent. "Don't be afraid of me, Peppa. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to be your friend. Forever," she said with a soft voice. "You're not real. You can't be my friend," Peppa replied. "But I will become real. Very soon, and then we will never part." And the window remains. Every night it opens wider. Every night Labubu comes closer to fully crossing into Peppa's world, and Peppa can only wait and hope that someone will believe her before it's too late. Because some doors, once opened, never close again, and some friends stay with us forever. whether we want them to or not.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa was helping Mummy Pig bake a cake in the kitchen. The flour seemed to shimmer, and the sugar sparkled with an unnatural glow. When Mummy Pig turned her back, Peppa saw a tiny, shadowy figure dart across the counter, stirring something into the batter. She blinked, and it was gone. The cake baked, filling the house with a sweet, sickly smell. Pause 30 seconds. When they cut into it, the inside was not cake, but a swirling dark mass, pulsating with a faint, eerie light. Mummy Pig, however, seemed not to notice, taking a bite with a vacant smile. Her eyes glazed over, and she began to hum a discordant tune. Peppa tried to warn Daddy Pig, but he too took a bite, his smile mirroring Mummy Pig's. The house grew silent, save for the unsettling humming. Peppa was alone, surrounded by her family, yet utterly alone. She could hear faint whispers coming from the cake, calling her name, inviting her to join them. The room grew colder, and the shadows danced around her, making the distorted faces of her parents seem to come alive. She closed her eyes, wishing it was all a dream, but the cold touch on her cheek told her it was terrifyingly real. Pause 30 seconds. When she opened them again, the cake was gone, but her parents were staring at her with empty, black eyes. Their smiles stretched into grotesque grins. She knew she was trapped. The house creaked and groaned around her, each sound a chilling reminder of the presence lurking within. She could hear faint whispers, carried on the wind, calling her name. The air grew heavy, and a strange, sweet smell filled the room, making her dizzy. She felt a cold touch on her ankle, and a shiver ran down her spine. Peppa knew she wasn't alone. Pause 30 seconds. The shadows in her room seemed to deepen, twisting into grotesque shapes. She could feel eyes watching her from every corner. The house was no longer a safe haven, but a trap. She pulled the covers over her head, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She knew she had to escape, but where could she go? The house was alive and it wanted her. She could hear the floorboards groaning, the walls creaking, as if the house itself was closing in on her. The air was thick with an unseen presence, and she felt a suffocating weight on her chest. Peppa knew this was the end. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was her parents, their eyes glowing red, staring at her. They were smiling, and then nothing, just the silence of the house, waiting for its next victim. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa was playing in her room when she noticed her favorite teddy bear, Teddy, was looking different. His button eyes seemed to follow her, and his stitched smile stretched wider than usual. She picked him up, but he felt cold, almost rigid. Pause 30 seconds. Later that night, a soft scratching sound came from under her bed. It sounded like tiny claws on the wooden floor. Peppa pulled her blanket tighter, but the scratching grew louder, closer. She peeked over the edge and saw Teddy, now much larger, with glowing red eyes, slowly crawling out from under the bed. His smile was now a gaping maw, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. He whispered her name, his voice a low, guttural growl, beckoning her to join him in the darkness. Pause 30 seconds. Peppa tried to scream, but no sound came out. The room grew colder, and the shadows danced around Teddy, making him appear even more monstrous. She closed her eyes tightly, wishing it was all a dream, but the cold breath on her face told her it was terrifyingly real. Pause 30 seconds. When she opened them again, Teddy was gone, but a small, muddy paw print was left on her pillow. She knew he would be back. The house creaked and groaned around her, each sound a chilling reminder of the presence lurking within. She could hear faint whispers, carried on the wind, calling her name. The air grew heavy, and a strange, sweet smell filled the room, making her dizzy. She felt a cold touch on her ankle, and a shiver ran down her spine. Peppa knew she wasn't alone. Pause 30 seconds. The shadows in her room seemed to deepen, twisting into grotesque shapes. She could feel eyes watching her from every corner. The house was no longer a safe haven, but a trap. She pulled the covers over her head, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She knew she had to escape, but where could she go? The house was alive and it wanted her. She could hear the floorboards groaning, the walls creaking, as if the house itself was closing in on her. The air was thick with an unseen presence, and she felt a suffocating weight on her chest. Peppa knew this was the end. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Teddy's glowing red eyes, staring at her from the foot of her bed. He was smiling, and then nothing, just the silence of the house, waiting for its next victim. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Daddy Pig was enjoying his favorite armchair, reading the newspaper, when the words on the page began to blur and rearrange themselves into unsettling messages. The familiar headlines about sunny days and muddy puddles transformed into cryptic warnings of impending doom. The armchair itself seemed to shift beneath him, its soft cushions hardening, and the floral pattern on the fabric twisting into grimacing faces. A faint, cold breath brushed against his neck, even though no one else was in the room. The scent of old paper and ink was replaced by a faint, metallic tang, like old blood. The television in the corner, turned off, flickered with static, showing fleeting images of distorted figures and shadowy landscapes. Daddy Pig, usually so calm, felt a growing unease. The comfortable silence of the living room was replaced by a low, persistent hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The framed family photos on the mantelpiece seemed to watch him, their smiles frozen and unnatural. The eyes in the pictures followed his every move. The air grew heavy, and the warmth of the fireplace faded, leaving a chilling cold. The newspaper in his hands felt heavy, its pages turning on their own, revealing increasingly disturbing images. The armchair began to rock gently, but no one was pushing it. The hum intensified, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and writhe, forming monstrous shapes. The familiar comfort of his living room was becoming a prison, and he was trapped within its unsettling embrace. The whispers began, soft at first, then growing louder, calling his name from every corner of the room. The house was no longer a home, but a sentient entity, and it was closing in. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa was playing with her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Dinosaur, when his button eyes seemed to follow her every move. She shook her head, thinking it was just her imagination. But then, a low growl rumbled from within the stuffed toy, and his fabric mouth stretched into a wide, toothy grin. Mr. Dinosaur, usually so cuddly, now felt cold and stiff in her arms. His stuffing seemed to shift and writhe, as if something was moving beneath the surface. Peppa dropped him, and he landed with an unnatural thud, his button eyes still fixed on her. The room grew dark, even though the sun was still shining outside. The shadows in the corners of her bedroom deepened, and the familiar toys on her shelf seemed to lean in, their plastic eyes glinting with a sinister light. Mr. Dinosaur began to twitch, then to crawl, slowly dragging himself across the carpet towards her. His growl intensified, becoming a guttural snarl. Peppa backed away, her heart pounding. The once comforting presence of her beloved toy had transformed into a terrifying predator. The air grew heavy, and the scent of dust and old fabric filled the room, mixed with something else, something foul and ancient. The other toys on the shelf began to whisper, their voices a cacophony of distorted sounds, urging Mr. Dinosaur on. The room felt smaller, closing in on her. Mr. Dinosaur lunged, his fabric mouth snapping open to reveal rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. Peppa screamed, but no sound came out. The room was filled with the terrifying presence of her once beloved toy, now a monstrous hunter. The familiar comfort of her bedroom had become a hunting ground, and she was the prey. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Daddy Pig was trying to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen, but the water wouldn't stop. It started as a drip, then a steady stream, and now a torrent, filling the sink and overflowing onto the floor. The water wasn't clear. It was murky and black, swirling with an unnatural current. Strange, iridescent bubbles rose to the surface, popping with a faint, unsettling hiss. Peppa and George watched, mesmerized and a little frightened, as the black water spread across the kitchen tiles, seeping under the cupboards and around the base of the refrigerator. The air grew heavy with the smell of stagnant water and something else, something ancient and metallic. The reflection in the growing puddle on the floor wasn't their kitchen. It was a distorted, shadowy realm, with skeletal trees and a sky the color of bruised plums. Daddy Pig, usually so confident, looked bewildered, his tools floating uselessly in the rising tide. The black water began to churn, and from its depths, faint, glowing eyes emerged, blinking slowly. They were not the eyes of fish, but something far older, far more sinister. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and laughter, was transforming into a dark, watery abyss. The sound of the rushing water filled their ears, drowning out all other sounds. The glowing eyes multiplied, surrounding them, their silent gaze chilling Peppa to the bone. The water level rose, slowly but inexorably, threatening to engulf them. The familiar kitchen table now looked like a small island in a vast, dark ocean. The black water pulsed with a faint, internal light, revealing glimpses of strange, elongated forms swimming beneath the surface. The house was being consumed, not by fire, but by a creeping liquid darkness. The glowing eyes drew closer, their silent presence a terrifying promise of what lay beneath the surface. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when Peppa noticed that the colors in her house were slowly draining away. Started with small things. The red apples in the kitchen bowl looked a little less bright than usual. The purple sofa in the living room seemed to have faded slightly, as if it had been left in the sun too long. At first, Peppa thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but as the hours passed, the effect became more obvious. The yellow walls were turning pale, like butter left out in the cold. The green carpet was becoming gray around the edges, as if the color was being sucked out from underneath. Mummy Pig was cooking dinner, but she didn't seem to notice that her orange dress was slowly turning white. The vegetables she was chopping were losing their vibrant colors one by one. The carrots went from bright orange to pale yellow to almost transparent. The green peas faded to gray, then to a sickly white. Daddy Pig was reading his newspaper, but the black ink was becoming lighter and lighter until the words were barely visible on the increasingly gray paper. His red shirt was turning pink, then pale pink, then almost white. Even his pink skin was becoming paler, as if he was slowly turning into a ghost. George was playing with his colorful blocks, but they were all turning the same dull gray color. His beloved dinosaur toy, once bright green, was now the color of old concrete. George himself seemed unaware that his blue shirt was fading to white, and his rosy cheeks were becoming as pale as paper. The most frightening part was that as the colors drained away, her family seemed to be losing their personalities too. Mummy Pig's cheerful humming became quieter and more monotone. Daddy Pig's hearty laughter turned into a weak chuckle, then into silence. George's excited dinosaur noises became whispers, then stopped altogether. Peppa ran to her bedroom and looked in the mirror. Her own reflection was losing color too. Her pink dress was turning white. Her rosy cheeks were becoming pale, and even her eyes seemed to be losing their sparkle. She watched in horror as her reflection became more and more like a black and white photograph. When she looked out her bedroom window, she saw that the entire world was being drained of color. The green trees were turning gray. The blue sky was becoming white, and even the sun looked like a pale circle of light with no warmth or brightness. The house felt colder as the colors disappeared. Without the warm yellows and cheerful reds, everything seemed lifeless and empty. The familiar rooms became strange and unwelcoming, like walking through a world made of shadows and fog. By evening, almost everything had turned gray or white. The family sat around the dinner table eating colorless food in silence. They moved slowly, as if the absence of color had drained their energy along with their appearance. Their faces were expressionless, their voices barely audible whispers. Peppa tried to remember what colors looked like, but the memories were fading too. She could barely recall what red was supposed to be, or how green had made her feel happy. The world was becoming a place where color had never existed, where everything had always been shades of gray and white. The episode ended with Peppa lying in her now white bed, looking up at a ceiling that had once been painted with cheerful pink flowers, but was now just pale shapes against a colorless background. As she closed her eyes, she wondered if she would wake up in a world where color was just a dream she had once had, or if the grayness would continue to spread until even her dreams became as empty and lifeless as everything else around her. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was the middle of the night when Peppa woke up to the sound of someone cooking in the kitchen. She could hear the familiar sounds of pots and pans, the sizzling of food, and the gentle humming that Mummy Pig always did while preparing meals. But it was 3 in the morning, and everyone should have been asleep. Peppa crept downstairs to investigate and found Mummy Pig standing at the stove, cooking what looked like breakfast. But when Peppa looked closer, she realized that Mummy Pig was making the same breakfast over and over again. She would crack an egg, cook it, put it on a plate, then immediately throw it away and start again. Daddy Pig was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper in the dark. The newspaper was blank, but he turned the pages anyway, making satisfied grunting sounds as if he was reading the most interesting stories. His eyes never moved, and he never looked up, even when Peppa spoke to him. George was in the living room, playing with his blocks in the darkness, but he wasn't building anything. He would stack 3 blocks, knock them down, stack them again, knock them down. In an endless cycle, his movements were mechanical and precise, like a toy that had been wound up. Peppa tried to turn on the lights, but they wouldn't work. The house remained in a strange twilight, dark enough that she could barely see, but light enough that she could make out the shapes of her family going through their nighttime routines that made no sense. When she looked out the window, she saw that all the houses on their street were glowing with the same dim light. In every window, she could see families doing strange things in the darkness. One family was having dinner at their coffee table. Another family was watching television that showed only static. Children were playing with toys that didn't make any sound. Peppa realized that time had stopped working properly in their house. The clock on the wall showed 3:17, but the hands never moved. When she looked at her watch, it showed a different time entirely, and the numbers seemed to be changing randomly rather than counting forward. She tried to go back to bed, but when she reached her room, she found another Peppa already sleeping there. The sleeping Peppa looked exactly like her, but when she breathed, no air moved in or out. Her chest rose and fell, but it was just motion without purpose. Like everything else in the house, the bathroom mirror showed her reflection, but the reflection was doing things she wasn't doing. While Peppa stood still, her reflection brushed its teeth. While Peppa brushed her teeth, her reflection combed its hair. They were always one step out of sync, like a dance where one partner was always behind. As the night continued, Peppa discovered that she was the only one in the house who was still real. Her family had become like mechanical dolls, going through the motions of living without any awareness or purpose. They responded to her voice with appropriate sounds, but their words were just recordings playing at the right moments. The episode ended with Peppa sitting on the stairs, watching her family perform their meaningless midnight routines. She wondered if this was what happened every night after she fell asleep, or if tonight was different. As dawn approached, she saw the first hint of real sunlight through the windows, and slowly, one by one, her family members stopped their strange activities and returned to their beds, leaving her alone with the memory of a night when she was the only living thing in a house full of beautiful, empty puppets.